Chapter 7 Vigilance Control. Operational only once the user is incapacitated. Clavon Richards had known Russ Wagner for 20 years. They'd worked for the same auto parts distributor for that entire time. In the last 10 years, when the company decided to consolidate the number of traveling salesmen, the two joined forces and officially became partners. They simply needed fewer employees out on the road, except for in some of the more remote locations. As Russ put it, the bosses still needed a couple of suckers to drive around in the middle of nowhere. So, Russ and Clavon's client lists were merged and they shared responsibilities ever since. They liked each other and admired each other's ethics and skills as salesmen, which made them a good team. They were also able to tolerate one another for long stretches of time, which made them adequate partners. After a full 2 days on the road and visiting a handful of clients, they found themselves in an awkward predicament, a first for each of them. Halfway across Utah, essentially in the middle of nowhere, Russ and Clavon sat outside on the hood of the car waiting for a cattle crossing to pass by. "I really didn't know they still did these," said Clavon. "What, cattle crossing?" Russ replied. "I mean, do you need any more proof?" The two sat watching as hundreds of cattle were steered past them by men and women on horseback. "I swear to God, though," Russ said, "if one more cowboy tips their hat at me or reassures me they're almost to the end, I'll spit." They were about 5 miles to the highway and surrounded by desert for as far as the eye could see. Russ looked around at the all but empty landscape and asked, "What goes on out here?" "Cattle crossings," Clavon answered. "No," Russ said. "It's nothing for miles, totally vacant. Rocks, dirt. It's beautiful land in its own way, but no one does anything with this area." "This place won't sustain anything," Clavon said. "It's only a matter of time before we aren't doing any business out here at all." "Maybe," Russ said. "Or," he continued, "maybe they just don't want you to think that." "They?" "Russ," Clavon began, shaking his head. "How long have we been on the road together? You could say 10 years, or you could say longer than most people stay married." "These days," Russ replied, "with all the infidelity going on, that's probably true. But what's your point?" "My point is that I know you very well by now," Clavon said. "And before you go on talking about some paranormal shit that goes on out here when no one is looking, I'd like to suggest we just sit here in silence. Let's just sit here patiently waiting and watching these cattle." They did sit there in silence for a few minutes, but Clavon could feel Russ's unease. He knew that once Russ had a thought, he wouldn't keep it to himself. He had to express it. He was that kind of person. And sure enough, it wasn't long before Russ broke the silence. "All I'm saying is, if you were going to have an alien research facility somewhere in this damn country, it'd be right here," Russ said, pointing toward the endless horizon. "Think about it. We've been on this road for nearly an hour, and not one single car has come along besides ours. I don't know about you, but I think that's odd. I mean, a cattle drive? Really? These days?" "Oh," said Clavon. "So now the cattle drive is fake. You think what? The government staged all this as soon as they saw us coming to what? Hide or protect a top secret facility where they keep aliens? A simple security guard wouldn't suffice." "It's not out of the realm of possibility," Russ said. "Yes, Russ," Clavon replied. "It definitely is. That is the most ridiculous, impractical thing you've said in a long while. You really should think things over more before saying them out loud." "Why?" asked Russ, offended. "With all the crazy shit that comes out in the news every day, why is that so ridiculous? Why is it so hard to imagine that there are secret government operations way the hell out here in the middle of the goddamn desert?" "Oh, it isn't hard to imagine," Clavon said. "It's not logical, is all. The desert may seem like an ideal location, but that would mean the aliens came all the way from some distant galaxy and decided to plop down here in the middle of nowhere, Utah. Makes absolutely no sense. Well, Russ argued, what if they crash landed out here? What if they were headed to, I don't know, Vegas or some shit, lost control, and then boom, the government picks them up on radar, comes on out, builds an underground base. The rest is history. Okay, Clavon said, chuckling. Maybe they crashed out here, but they sure as hell wouldn't land here intentionally. Can we at least agree on that? In fact, any intelligent life capable of traveling to another planet like Earth wouldn't even worry about humans in the first place. Wouldn't be their primary focus. Ha! Russ exclaimed. That's hilarious. Now who's being ridiculous? It makes perfect sense, Clavon explained. If I were them, hypothetically, of course, I'd seek out the species with the most sophisticated form of communication. Right, Russ said. Humans. Wrong, Clavon retorted. Whales. Give me a break, Russ said. Whales? Really? Absolutely, Clavon said. Although humans may have the most complex form of communication, it's whales that have the most sophisticated, the most universal. A whale's song can travel for miles too without any technology or a phone. I read all about it once. They call out whenever they have something to say, and they know their signal will eventually be received. Their language is simpler and easier to comprehend than humans who, as you'll surely agree, tend to overcomplicate just about everything. Well, you're right about that, Russ finally concurred. Us humans do tend to screw up just about everything. The conversation ended, and the remainder of the cattle soon passed by. When the road was once again clear, Russ and Clavon got back in the car and proceeded to the highway. After 10 minutes of silence, Russ finally murmured, Whales, huh? Yep, Clavon said. I think it was blue whales, but might have been humpback. I don't recall exactly. The sun began to set, and the two partners arrived at their last client for the day, a small outpost of sorts. Immediately after the end of a long 300-mile stretch of road with no services was a small rest stop consisting of a single pump gas station. A half-mile further down the road was an auto garage with a modest store attached, which also sold auto parts. Check the notes on this guy, Russ told Clavon, as they sat in the parking lot in front of the store. I remember he had 2 first names, but what else do we have on him? Let me see, Clavon said, looking through a small leather-bound book. Ralph Corey, he said. You were right. Sole proprietor. And he's a single employee. Also wrote down poor phone communication. Recommend in-person visits only. Let's see. Oh, this place was maxed out on inventory last time we were here. Looks like about a year and a half ago. I don't have any recollection of this client, Russ. Ralph Corey, owner, Russ said, sitting up and fixing his shirt collar and hair in the mirror. Conveniently located off the highway, yet remote. Must get a lot of truckers and breakdowns. Probably sees a good bit of overheated engines out here during the summer months. 1.5 years since last visit. Likely needs an order. Got it. Anything else before we head inside? Yeah, Clavon said. There's a note that says, not a talker. But these are your notes. I don't remember this place at all, do you? Clavon folded his book and placed it on the dashboard as Russ thought for a moment. Oh, hell, Russ groaned. I think I remember this guy. As they got out of the car, Russ explained, yeah, a couple years back, I did Utah alone. It was your daughter's wedding, remember? Oh, right, Clavon recalled. That's when you were here? I didn't get through the front door, Russ admitted. What? Clavon said with a degree of shock. You couldn't make a sale, much less talk your way through the front door? Russ Wagner denied? I find that hard to believe. If memory serves, he's a hard nut to crack, this guy, Russ said as they made their way toward the front of the shop. He met me over by the garage, and we had a conversation that lasted all of 2 goddamn seconds. Russ grabbed the front door's handle and said one last thing to Clavon before opening it. Let me do the talking here, okay? The fewer voices, the better, I think. Then, before Russ could open the door, it pushed forward abruptly, causing him to take a step back, or he would have fallen. Clavon and Russ looked up and saw a stone-faced man standing in the threshold before them. Ralph Corey, Russ said with a smile. He extended his hand and stepped forward, turning on his well-practiced salesman charm. I never forget a man with two first names. How are you, sir? Russ Wagner and Clavon Richard, at your service. The man casually shook Russ's hand but said nothing. Clavon refrained from offering his, immediately sensing the customer would, in fact, be a hard nut to crack. Auto Parts Distribution sent us to check on your inventory, Russ said, allowing his voice to raise 2 octaves. See how you're doing. See if there's anything we can do for you, sir. The man stared at Russ, then at Clavon, then back at Russ. Without a word, he slowly stepped to one side and held the door for them to enter the store. Once inside, he ushered for them to follow him across the room toward an office located behind the front counter. The office was small and allowed for only enough room for one person to sit at the desk, so Russ and Clavon occupied the doorway while giving their pitch. Nice shop you got here, Mr. Corey, Russ said. No lie, Clavon and I, we've seen it all out there. And let me tell you, this place is spotless, all right. Nothing better than a clean shop. Ralph Corey sat quietly behind his desk, his hands folded in his lap. He had yet to utter a single word in response, and so Russ continued to fill the void with his usual script. Say, we won't take up too much of your time, it being the end of a long day for you, I'm sure. We were just passing by and, as promised, wanted to follow up since our last visit. I made a note that you were all stocked up just over a year back and figured you could use some new merchandise. Am I right? Russ waited, but the man let Russ's words linger in the silence. Without looking, Russ could feel his partner grow tense at Ralph Corey's lack of interaction. It was all he could do to not end the conversation, such as it was, and get up and leave. But the salesman in him wouldn't allow it. Though the situation was instantly unnerving to him, in all of his years on the road, Russ was anything but a quitter. It was one thing to bide your time, to know when to back off, but his main job was to apply the correct amount of pressure. It was worth noting that his partner had become as put off by the situation as he was, but there was in Russ's mind still hope for a sale. His reputation with the company and his own dignity forced him to remain standing in the small office, even though the air around them seemed to get heavier and stuffier with every passing second. You know, Russ said, crossing his arms and leaning back against the door, trying to look relaxed. All bullshit aside, Mr. Corey, I admire a man of few words. I really do. And I can see you're a straight shooter. Yes, sir. Tell you what, I bet you get your share of business out here, but I can see you're doing just fine at the moment. So here's my card, Russ said, placing his business card on the desk. You call me day or night, anytime at all, weekends even, I'll be there, okay? You need anything at all, just give me a ring and I'll fix you right up. Again, Ralph Corey sat staring without a word and completely motionless. Not even an attempt to pick up the business card. Anger began to build inside of Russ. His blood boiled in the face of such blatant rudeness. He knew it best not to escalate the situation, not to allow his emotions to spill over and cause a scene, for Clavon's sake, if not his own. Nevertheless, he could feel his disgust steadily evolving into rage toward the man who just sat there, refusing to speak. Russ quickly searched his mind for something else to focus on, a happy thought by which to calm himself down with, but it was difficult to do. He was the sort of person who spoke his mind unapologetically, no matter what, and he always had been. And there it was, the one thing that seemed to do the trick. He thought that he had always been that way, that things were as they were and always would be. Russ imagined the desert, the landscape, and the way the horizon seemed to go on and on. Russ thought about the cattle crossing, the sounds they'd made walking by, the way the dust rose up around their hooves, and how, for all that commotion, It was a relatively peaceful thing to witness. The visuals were soothing, but he focused his thoughts, realizing he needed to say something soon until he imagined a single image. Russ smiled, and all at once became calm again, while in his mind he saw a symbol, what his neighbor Jerry Miller had described as a lazy 8. Russ pushed himself off the wall he'd been leaning against, stood upright, and clapped his hands. "Well," he said, turning to leave, "we'll be on our way then, Mr. Corey. But don't forget, we update our policies and product guarantees all the time with our customers' best interests in mind. So, like I said, you need anything at all, and we got your back." Russ and Clavon waited, assuming Ralph Corey would see them out, but instead, he sat at his desk and, finally showing signs of life, put an unlit cigarette in his mouth. "Okay, then, we'll show ourselves out," Russ said, placing one hand on Clavon's shoulder. "You have a good night, Mr. Corey, and thanks for your time. Enjoy that cigarette." The two partners smiled as politely as they could, left the office, and proceeded across the store back the way they'd entered. During their brief visit, it had become dark outside, but the parking lot was illuminated by a well-placed floodlight on the front of the garage. They exited the building and walked toward the car. "Wow," Clavon mumbled. "Not a talker and then some, I'd say." "Son of a bitch must be mute," Russ grumbled under his breath. "What a prick." But before they could issue any more insults, and just before reaching the car, the floodlight went out and the two of them were left in total darkness. They stopped, frozen in place as their eyes adjusted. "Oh, thanks, asshole. Are you serious?" Russ began to complain. "Why would he?" Clavon began to ask, looking back at the storefront. There, in the window, Clavon spotted what looked like the flicker of a cigarette lighter and the burning end of a cigarette. "Russ," he whispered, "he's watching us. Look, see?" Russ saw it too. The burning cigarette cherry glowing as Ralph Corey stood in the darkened store, no lights on, inside or out, smoking while watching them. "Let's go, now," Russ ordered, and they both quickly got in the car and closed the doors. But Russ paused and did not put the key in the ignition. "What are you waiting for?" Clavon asked impatiently. "This asshole wants to play games," Russ said. "Russ," Clavon urged, "let's just go." "No," Russ answered. "I'm not turning my back on this prick for one damn second." Without looking away from the front of the store, Russ pointed toward the glove box. "Get it out." "Russ," Clavon said, "seriously, let's just split, man." "Get it out," Russ repeated. "Hand me the damn mouser." And with that, Clavon opened the glove box and fetched a small gun holster containing a pistol no more than 5 inches in length. He handed it to Russ without making his movements obvious to Ralph Corey, who remained in the front window, apparently still watching them. Russ took the gun out of the holster and cocked the small pistol, uncommonly known as a mouser. Although it wasn't the most ferocious-looking handgun on the market, it was a perfect self-defense tool to keep in the car for occasions where the two men felt threatened while on the road. Those occasions, albeit rare, happened more than a few times over the years, but thankfully had yet to result in either of them actually discharging the gun. Russ slowly rolled down the driver's side window and handed the empty holster back to Clavon. Russ gripped the mouser, but let the weapon rest on his leg. They waited, and Clavon knew better than to interrupt his partner's concentration. Expecting some measure of calamity would ensue, he sat quietly in anticipation. But, without warning, Russ turned on the car's headlights instead. It was as if he had just directed a giant spotlight onto the front of Ralph Corey's shop. But the window was empty. The man was gone. "What is this?" Clavon whispered. "Okay," Russ said, starting up the car. We're leaving. Russ put the car in reverse and slowly backed all the way out of the parking lot, leaving the light shining on the store as they made their way. Once on the road again, Russ made haste, merging onto the highway, and quickly reached top speed. A few miles further, Russ handed the mouser to Clavon, who secured it back in its holster and safely inside the glove box. "Well," Russ said with a heavy sigh, "make no mistake about it, Ralph Corey is not a whale." Chapter 8. Dead Man's Handle. Design self-awareness in place of human engineering. On his way into the local home and garden store, Jerry asked the cashier if the nursery sold ladybugs. Still absorbing the idea of such a thing, he half expected them to laugh in his face. Back wall, said the cashier, in the corner. Jerry waved thanks and headed to the back of the store. The arborist hadn't been pulling his leg after all, he thought to himself. People really do buy and sell ladybugs. It was true. Standing in the aisle, Jerry smiled with wonder at the selection before him. Just as he'd been told, there were bags of ladybugs in various quantities. Small mesh bags, some containing 1,000, others 3,000, and others with 5,000. Jerry contemplated how many he would require, how large of an army he would amass. Besides quantities, Jerry didn't see any other defining features. There didn't seem to be any differences between them, as if some might be stronger or more able than others. No, these soldiers were equally powerful, and so it seemed the only decision he had to make was how much combined strength would be needed. The arborist had referred to what would surely be a massacre once the ladybugs were set loose in his yard. That term stuck with Jerry, and he couldn't help but imagine himself a general of sorts, strategizing the necessary military might for the operation at hand. Jerry picked up a bag of 1,000 ladybugs to feel its exact weight for himself. Though he held it pinched between his finger and thumb, he could feel the contents of the bag moving. He held it in front of his face and watched the ladybugs crawl over top of each other, using the bag's mesh weave as a ladder to reach the top of the pile. They were alive and writhing with energy. They seemed hungry for battle, and they wanted out. Jerry held the bag, testing its weight, then placed it back and took up a bag of 5,000. The substantially heavier bag appealed to Jerry, but he wasn't sure it would be enough. For all his insightfulness, the arborist hadn't been specific about exactly how many Jerry would need to cure his aphid-infested tree. And so he assumed that meant you couldn't have too many. So, playing it safe, Jerry grabbed 4 bags of ladybugs with 5,000 per bag. Yes, he thought to himself, an army of at least that many soldiers should do the trick. But it wasn't until he was in the checkout line that it occurred to him he hadn't made a point of checking the price. No matter, he thought to himself, whatever rates these mercenaries for hire charged would be well worth the cause. The cashier rang up his order, and to his surprise, the cost was a total of $5. That's it? Jerry asked. Yes, the cashier said. They're just ladybugs. Oh, Jerry said, trying not to take offense at the cashier's casual insult toward his newly acquired army. Well, in that case, here's 10. I'd like to get 4 more bags if that's okay. Sure, the cashier replied, placing the individual packages in one shopping bag. Just keep your receipt on you. Jerry paid and went to the back of the store. He grabbed the last 4 bags of 5,000, then exited the store proudly with a total of 40,000 ladybugs. Immediately outside of the store, Jerry came face to face with none other than his fellow teacher, Angie Lewis, and her husband, Stephen. Killer Miller, Angie exclaimed. You were serious about doing yard work on your vacation. Hey, Angie, Jerry replied. You remember my husband, Stephen, she said, looking at the shopping bag in Jerry's hand. We just got back from the beach. Oh, how was it? Jerry asked. Hope you got some rest. It rained, Stephen said, the entire time. Oh, sorry, said Jerry. That's too bad. I was fucking losing it, Angie whined, still staring at the shopping bag. She was, Stephen confirmed. We had like 1.5 days of actual sunshine in 2 weeks. It was hell. We played board games. It was worse than being at home, Angie added, then asked, Jerry, is that bag moving? At least you still have all of the summer left to chill out, Jerry said, ignoring her question. Hey, Angie said, don't act as if you didn't hear me. Your bag, it's moving. No, it's not, Jerry corrected her. The bag is not moving. the ladybugs inside are. Angie stepped back and cowered behind her husband. Ladybugs? Stephen asked. Cool, I want to see. Jerry held the bag open so Stephen and Angie could look inside. Stephen smiled while his wife inched her way around him, avoiding the bugs at all costs while headed inside the store. I don't know what you're up to, Killer Miller, Angie said, walking away from him. But it's gross. Come on, Stephen. Stephen followed her. He smiled back in Jerry's direction and asked, What do you do with them? What are they for? You let them loose in the yard, Jerry answered. They kill stuff. Awesome, Stephen said, then went inside the store with his wife. Jerry watched them leave, listening to Stephen repeat to Angie what he just told him. He said they kill stuff. Jerry then closed the bag and headed back toward his car. On the way, he thought again about how much he hated that nickname, although, in the appropriate context, General Killer did have a certain ring to it. Back at home, Jerry stood in his driveway, reading the instructions listed on one bag of ladybugs. It seemed simple enough. Open the bag and activate the ladybugs in the area you want them to rescue. They will find their way and go straight to work. The only thing that was important was the conditions had to be ideal. The instructions said to let them loose early in the morning or in the evening, when there would be less light and the temperatures are cooler. Apparently, they'd all fly away otherwise. The directions also said that most of them would be hibernating while in the carrier bag, so letting them out right after it rained would be optimal since they'd be thirsty when fully awakened. It was evening, and the sun had began to set, so in Jerry's mind, the mission was already off to a good start. But Colorado wasn't known for moisture, so Jerry decided to manufacture the conditions as best he could with a garden hose. After soaking the tree thoroughly, Jerry ripped open one bag and set it at the base of the tree. Without any hesitation, the ladybugs emerged and began to travel upward, exactly as planned. Jerry was nothing if not proud, and so he quickly opened the other bags, placed them at the base of the trunk, and within minutes, tens of thousands of the little critters were swarming the entire tree. A few did go AWOL and flew away immediately, but those cowards didn't cause any damage to maneuvers overall. It was amazing to watch. Not only did the ladybugs seem to know exactly what to do, but they were organized about it. They marched in columns, stayed in formation, spreading out only to cover more ground. Jerry admired the army from his position just behind the front line, as an unseen choir of angelic voices sang out a triumphant rallying song. Trumpets blared and heralded the setting sun's final rays of light, which shone down and cast a limelight over the scene. It was as if the ladybugs were, at that moment, the only thing in the entire world of any importance. General Killer oversaw the operation, which he had only just then named Operation Aphid Massacre. With his chest puffed and on the verge of joyful tears. Yes, Jerry thought to himself, this infestation was evil, and, before morning's dawn, justice for his entire yard would be achieved. Preoccupied by the activity below, Jerry almost didn't notice a small series of snapping sounds from overhead. The sounds had happened in quick succession, and by the time Jerry looked up, it was too late. As soon as he recognized the noise, Jerry heard it one last time, loudly. Snap! After that, everything suddenly went black. The ladybug's assault and the vicious sounds of her breaking branch would be the last thing Jerry remembered from that day.